we're going to get into the visual now, the visual approach to audio, and what I call the 3D sound field. And we'll also get into some basic ear training exercises, and that involves the mix mapping worksheet. And and I'll explain how this basically works. Essentially, when we work with sound, right, or sound in our lives is inextricably connected to our sight. So, as human beings, we have at least five senses, and whatever it's sight, hearing, touch, taste, feeling. I doubled up on what smell, right? That's the other one. And the two that are most connected are sight and sound, because they actually fill out what the other is missing in probably a greater way than any other thing. And those are the two biggest in terms of our survival mechanisms. That and touch, of course, is a very big survival mechanism. But the sound is inextricably connected to our sight. So for the vast majority of the history of humankind, we have always attributed sound to physical objects, right? A tree falling in the woods, right? So even if you don't see the tree, you could picture it in your head. Today, like if you listen to something and it's a viola or a violin or a cello, you could actually picture that instrument, right? You have a visual. There's a physical object that creates that sound. And up until the time of synthesis, there has never been sound created that didn't come really from some physical object. And of course, a synth is a physical object, but it's created synthetically, right? In other words, you're not when you have a synthesizer and it's creating a piano sound, it's not an actual piano, right? It's just a bunch of oscillators that are mixed together that create the envelope and sound shape of a piano, right? So that's really that stepping stone, but it doesn't negate the connection between our sight and our sound. And this is really a critical thing to understand, because when we actually perceive sound in space, we have the ability to localize it, right? We have the ability to figure out what its location is. And localization is the key to the 3D sound field. And maybe, let's see, I think I have some, I may have some heads up here. Maybe I don't. Maybe they're down at the bottom. There we go. Okay, so with the dummy heads here, essentially when sound hits us, right, it will generally hit either the left ear or the right ear first, and this will give us our perception of direction, right? So this will give us the sense that we are in a particular or that the sound is coming from a particular location, right? For example, right? So this way, just from a simple thing, it's just a timing or delay thing. And the one drawing I have is don't have is the one that I need, which is probably just a round head, right? So looking from the top side view. So when a sound hits us, right, it'll hit one ear sooner than the other. And that gives us our perception of left and right, right? And so that timing is very sophisticated. But what it doesn't say really is that the sound, it wraps around the head, it goes through the ear, but we also have reflections that give us a sense of the environment. Okay, and that's called what they call early reflections. And that also plays a role in the way that we hear. Also, if you look at the pinna, the outer ear, it has a certain shape. It's focused towards the front. So a sound may be coming from the rear, right? And so if I have a sound source coming from this direction, it's going to hit this ear first and then hit the other ear, right? It's going to wrap around and hit the other ear at a certain delay later. Right? No big deal there, right? So this is just binaural hearing, right? Binaural hearing, right? So it's horrible penmanship here, right? B-I-N-A-U-R-A-L. Now, what's the difference between the sound coming from behind and hitting one ear sooner than the other, or from the front? And that is the shape of the ear. So if it comes from the back, there's going to be a certain coloration. It's not going to be as focused coming into the ear, because when the sound comes into the ear, it actually wraps around this little curve here and focuses right into the ear canal. That's what the whole ear shape is for. You look at any animal, most animals have ears, right, that stick out. Some, like cats, can really move them around. They can really focus the sound in, right? And it gives them an amazing localization. So we have this ability to localize based off of this. So we can tell the difference between front and back. based off of how it hits the ear, the outer ear. When we have a sound coming from above, okay, then it wraps around, and it also has a certain coloration from one ear to the other because it's not coming from the front, and the same from below. Okay, but there are also frequency differences that generally happen. So higher frequencies tend to get absorbed more by surfaces on the ground, right? Because carpet and things like that are generally soft. Because of gravity, there are many more objects, okay, on the ground which absorb high frequencies, and high frequencies are generally least obstructed from above us. So that also plays in a factor. The other factor that comes into this, and I'm just going to hide the heads here for a second, is the fact that when we're in a space and we're listening from a certain location, the sound source not only it hits us, right? It comes in and it hits us from a certain direction, but it also bounces off the walls and hits us. And so this reflection off of this wall hits this ear, also wraps around the head and goes into this ear. And the reflection off of here does the same and also wraps around. And the reflection off the back wall wraps around both sides, right? And this way, right? So from every direction, floor, ceiling, and all the walls, these are what are called early reflections. And these early reflections also give us a sense of up, down, left, right, front, back, right? And so these reflections that come off the different surfaces, the way that they're colored by the materials of the room will give us the sense of the size of the space, and will also give us a sense that the signal is coming from above us or below us, in addition to being just left, right, front, back. So all of these things mixed together create our binaural hearing, and this gives us the ability to localize things. So this localization is really, 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 really key to understand, because when we project sound through speakers, the biggest issue that we have is that the sound is coming from two sources, not from one, okay? And when sound comes from two sources simultaneously, then what happens is we get something that's unnatural. Because if a sound was just coming from this speaker, it would take a normal trajectory, hit one ear, and then hit the other ear at a certain timing later, right? A short delay later, maybe a millisecond later. And this would give us the ability to localize this one speaker. However, if we're feeding the same signal to both speakers at equal volume, then what's happening is this speaker is also hitting the left ear of the listener at the same timing as the signal coming from the right ear. But it's also spilling around and going around in the other side. So now what we have is we have these two signals, right? The direct signal for the left and right ear, okay, that are coming in. And then in addition to that, I'm just going to switch to a different color here. We're also going to have a delayed signal that's added in on each side. That's the same. And this is going to create a phase coloration because this is going to blend together, right? And it's going to color, right, the fact. It's going to create what's called a comb filtering effect. And this comb filtering effect is going to filter certain frequencies, and it's going to thicken certain frequencies. And so what's happening here is that the image will sound like it's coming from the center, but it will sound kind of fuzzy. As we pan to the left or pan to the right, and it goes to a mono source or a single source as its location, the sound will become more focused, right? So you'll actually be able to see it or visualize it better, localize it better, and it will get smaller, right? And I'll explain that as we go along. So this is really an important factor here with this, right? This fact that we have the speakers coming, or the sound coming from two sources. So what does this mean? What this does is it just skews the way that we work, right? We're dealing with stereo. Now, we're not dealing with surround. With surround mixing, you have a lot more control over the localization of things because you have speakers coming from behind, center, left, and right. And that's actually the way film works, right? And even with some film, they have 7.1, so they have side fills, right? Left extra, right extra. And, but most people don't have those systems for when they listen to music. And primarily the way most people listen to music today is through headphones. So you don't get that surround aspect. But you can still maintain and get that imaging by exaggerating the binaural cues that allow us to have the perception of things coming from up, down, left, right, front, back. So a sound coming from far away, for example here, right? Will have less strength in terms of the direct signal, and it will have more strength from the reflections. right? Relatively. In other words, the balance of the reflected energy and the direct will be more closely related to each other, and the timing will be closer, right? So if this object is down a long hallway, right, and that hallway is 400 feet away, right, then all the reverberant energy is going to arrive at almost the same time as the direct sound, okay? Whereas if somebody is up front, then the direct sound is going to arrive in a very short period of time, and it's going to take longer for those delays to get back to the listener. Okay, these are things that factor in, right, in terms of the tools that you work using early reflections programs and reverb programs. Create a sense of distance, of front backness, right? And then we'll get into some of the things with working with signals going up and down, right? And that gets more into the 3D sound field, right? So you get this idea, right, that what we're doing is we're translating binaural hearing into speakers. And the way that we can make that work is by exaggerating the effects of it, right? And then what we can do is we can create all kinds of fun stuff. So when we look here at our speakers, okay, there's some other things that happen in terms of the way that all of this works, right? So, and some of you guys who have already participated in the workshop here, you've seen some of this stuff, and I get into it in much more detail in the lesson videos, right? So you can see it there. But from here, what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to get into like a brush here and to get into some of the different frequency areas. Now, the frequency spectrum that we can hear ranges, from about 20 hertz. It looks like I have some other window open that's blocking some things here. So let me just go to a layer here and start there. That might be easier. So our hearing range goes from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz. And so the majority of a lot of this low stuff here is really felt more than heard, and most people can't hear up to 20 kilohertz, although they can feel it. So the outer extremities, really, if I did my frequency range here from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz, really what we have up here is really feeling sensation probably up to like about 45 cycles or so. And then from there, our ability to hear gets clearer as we go up. And then in the high mid-range frequencies like 2 to 6K, we have the most sensitivity. And then it starts to dip down again, right? So there's an area here when you start to get above 10 kilohertz, 16 kilohertz, really, most people can't hear really up that high. And so again, it starts to get a feeling sensation or a sensation of space. And that's really kind of a key thing here, right? So let's just, start from there. So when we actually are working with sound, those frequencies actually ride up and down in the speakers, right? So high frequencies, because they are least obstructed, have a tendency to kind of reside up in the speakers, okay? High mid frequencies, and I'll do these with a different color here with the green, have a tendency to kind of sit above the speakers, but give us the sense of focus, right? So this gives us a sense of air, of size, or height. This gives us a sense of bringing things toward us or towards the front of us. Mid-range frequencies put things right between the speakers, right? They fix things right between the speakers, and they stay solidly there. And a lot of the fundamentals of instruments exist in this range. Low-mid frequencies, as we go down the spectrum, predominantly lie in this area, right? And these can create a lot of bunched up muddiness, right, in sound, right, if things are out of balance. And then down at the bottom, we have the low end. And because a lot of the low end, right, particularly the lower octave or lowest octave of our hearing, is all basically vibration. If you have a speaker that can reproduce down below 40 cycles, they're subfrequencies, right? And those frequencies have a tendency to transmit into the floor. So we feel them through our feet, right? We feel the vibration through our body, right, as coming from the floor, right? And so that resonance plays like a big part in the way that all of this works, right? So that's the basics from there. When we look from a top side view, okay, or maybe better, I guess, would be from a side view, right? So let me just kind of put up a little bit of some speakers here from this perspective. If we were looking from a side view, and we had our speakers right here, and our listening position was somewhere out here, then the frequencies actually have a different role here as well, right? So what we have is, our higher frequencies up top, and they have a tendency to add space in the back and bring things up, right? So they're bringing things up in the speakers as we went. But looking from this in terms of the depth, right? This depth will kind of come all the way out. It's like a cloud kind of over everything. And the low frequencies are very much the same way, right? Because it's a feeling sensation. It actually vibrates right to our feet, right? And so that's all low. The mid-range stuff is a little bit trickier, right? The low mid-range stuff, if it's predominantly balanced in the low mid area, will have a tendency to kind of sit back here, right? And if improperly balanced, it will grab the low end and pull it up towards the middle of the speakers. When we get to mid-range energy, that just sits right in the speaker, right? It just sits right there, nowhere else for it to go. And then if we go on to our higher frequencies, if we have high mid frequencies, they will have a tendency to stand out front. So there's a sort of tilt that happens, right? The one thing that people do with EQ most often is they add 2 to 6K to make something more clear or more present. And what that does is it really brings out a lot of the transient or the attack of the audio signal and pulls it forward. But it's a relative balance, because if there's also a lot of low mid mixed in with those high mids, it will kind of sit back in the speaker. So there's a balance that you are trying or attempting to achieve in the way that you put the instruments together. If you have too many instruments with too much low mid energy, what it's going to do is when it gets out of balance, it's going to push things up into the speakers, particularly the low end, and make everything very muddy sounding. If you have too much of it scooped away, then your mix sits up high and there's no low energy, right? So here in this exercise, or what I'm showing you here, is that from the other perspective, right, we have a depth perspective and a height perspective, right? So front, back, up, down is achieved mostly by frequencies. And I'll spit out this term, what I call frequency density, right? It's not the amount of the frequency, it's the density, okay? So because it's the density that we perceive, right, and creates the actual visual image, right? That's where all of the imaging comes from. The idea of this workshop, when you kind of work through all the different things that I'm teaching you with compression and equalization, is that you're trying to create density within certain frequency pockets. And by doing that with compressors and with equalizers and with the other forms of effects processing, what you can do is you can create a density for the sound so it has a focused, localized, easily localized place. And the more focused it is and localized in that place, the less it interferes with the other things. The problem is that it's kind of a house of cards, because in a mix we have many instruments. We may have many instruments, and all those instruments mix together and they all influence each other. Sometimes they blend together like a group of violins, right? And you perceive them as a group of violins, and so you sort of mix them together as a grouping. Sometimes you want to separate them. Two separate guitar players, one playing an acoustic guitar, one playing an electric guitar. They may occupy very similar frequency areas, but we want to find ways to separate and kind of move them around, right? And work with them.